Good evening and welcome to the Public Affairs Lecture Series. I'm Aaron Scavlin, the Director of Civic Engagement, and Ryan, please come on up. Yeah. So we have an announcement. Next week, we will not be having a lecture. We will be having a campus conversation about an international issue led by a group from public health, some students from public health, who will be leading this conversation and I believe modeling how to have difficult conversations in a civil manner. Yeah? A skill that may be more urgent than ever. So you will be in attendance, and we'd like to invite you to invite your friends. This is open to the public, just like these lectures are. But next week we'd really, well, this week we'd really like a lot of people to be here. But next week we'd also hope for that. Ryan, would you have anything to add?
Yeah. Am I talking to this microphone? I feel like we're really doing this in an official way. So the thing that is valuable about this from a careers point of view is that it's sort of like you do like the HR training of like how to negotiate things with other people. And so like some of the most interesting things that I've had when I was in graduate school were like when the negotiation project people came and talked to us. And so I do feel like it can be like a fun thing that is also has an application. So if you know other people, this is just my plug for it. So if you want to bring other people who also like being in class from 5 to 6, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah. And now, Ryan.
And now we're doing our two-part introduction of Shannon. Wait, so let me say, so this is, I don't know why that doesn't have to be in the microphone, but for my class, that if you want me to review with you the your CV resume, I'm happy to do that. But if you also got plenty of advice from the Career Center person, that's fine. So that's that. Any questions about that bit of programming?
Actually, let me interject.
Do you have a
And none of my students have come to talk to me about their final paper, so you're welcome to do that before the Thanksgiving holiday because you may be working on that paper over the break. So
yeah.
don't delay.
So now we're both going to partly introduce Shannon. Shannon Ellsworth is a bird watcher of some note in Utah County, a former member of the Provo City Council, and an alum of various universities, including BYU, and a professor at BYU. Did I take everything?
She's also an external advisory board member for civic engagement, which may not be her most important role, but it's one that we greatly appreciate. Yes. All right. With no further ado.
Ready to clap now.
Yeah. Shannon Ellsworth.
Okay. Great. I am learning sign language. I started learning sign language this summer, and I'm not great at it, but I do know how to sign this, and it's I'm happy to see you. So that's what I wanted to sign. Yes. Great. So, as mentioned, I'm Shannon Ellsworth. My full-time job is working at a mine, and technically my full-time job is email, but I work at a mine. I work for a global mining corporation called Rio Tinto, and Rio Tinto is the second largest mining and minerals company in the world, and they operate in 35 countries. And Rio Tinto owns a mine called the Kennecott Mine here in Utah. It's a copper mine, and strangely, I grew up in a town next to the copper mine, and the high school I went to is Bingham High School. Did anybody grow up in Salt Lake area? Some of us did. So I went to Bingham High School, and ironically, well, not by coincidence, the mine used to be called the Bingham Canyon Mine, and then they had a high school up near the mine called Bingham High School. Then they moved it down to South Jordan, and the mascot for the high school is the Miners. So kind of weird. I grew up in this town. I go to this high school, I move away, I moved to Arizona, I moved to Logan, I went on a mission to Chile, And somehow I end up back in the town where I grew up, working for the mine. So that's a picture of the copper mine, that pit. It's, I think it's about 1.5 miles wide and about 3/4 of a mile deep. It's been mined for copper for 120 years. And that's me in my PPE. And I love wearing PPE because, one, you don't have to think about what you're going to wear, and two, everybody's name is on their shirt. So that makes my life easier. And I'm holding a gold bar. And the gold bar, I think at that time when I was holding it, was worth like $750,000 and is very heavy. And if you ever see a movie where they're like stealing gold bars, very impractical, they're very heavy. You're not running away easily with a gold bar. My job at the mine is unique because this mine, most mines are located in the middle of nowhere. So we have mines in Canada that are like adjacent to the Arctic Circle and you have to fly in. We have mines in Western Australia, Northern Australia, Eastern Australia, and they call them fly in, fly out. So you live in a big city, but then on Monday you get on a plane and you fly to this really remote area, and you kind of live there for the week in the village, and you work at the mine, then on Friday you fly home. Or maybe it's every 10 days or whatever their system is. And they're very remote, but this mine happens to be next to a major metropolitan area. And so they are impacted by the community, and the community is impacted by the mine. And one thing about mining is that it leaves noticeable environmental damage. And in about 2000, the Kennecott mine said, you know, we have this excess land, it's adjacent to the city. We think we could return some community benefit to the broader community if we were to develop a really nice development, really nice community. And so that's what they did. They had 4,000 acres, which is pretty big. And they said, let's annex this into the city. We'll work with the city and really bright kind of these city planners that were kind of pushing the limits in terms of what sustainable city planning looked like. They hired them, and they developed a master planned community, which is called Daybreak. So Daybreak is this community that was developed by the mine, and there's a lot of sustainability practices that are baked into it, right? Into the design, they were front loaded. And that involves transportation, it involves sidewalks. I heard from a city council member in the city of South Jordan today. She lives in Daybreak, and she was so happy. She's telling a room full of developers, the sidewalks in Daybreak are 5 feet wide or wider. And if you go to another town, they're only like 4 feet wide, and it really makes a difference. and I am like, I've become a sidewalk nerd over the years. Where I do teach a class on campus, I really went off on sidewalks one day. But anyways, they integrated these systems into this master plan community to try and reduce carbon emissions, to try and increase safety, increase connectivity. They integrated housing types, which is really novel. In most cities, they're kind of separating the haves from the have-nots, but you'll find better, more sustainable socioeconomic outcomes, and you can lift people out of a lower socioeconomic class if they have access to and connections with someone who has social or economic resources. And so by not segregating economically, they've created a really vibrant community. So that's what I do at work. My job, we don't own Daybreak anymore, we sold it, but my job is to plan the next Daybreak. Bring the water, figure out the soils, connect the electricity, figure out the topo, the transportation, the trails in a new master plan community. And it's really unique because I get to work for a global organization where at the office maybe a third of my colleagues are from a different country, but I get to do something for the city where I grew up, and that has this cradle-to-cradle story of what was once used for mining copper, which we all use and we all need, to creating something else that gives it a second life. So that's what my day job is. It's managing a lot of consultants, it's being a project manager, it's negotiating with UDOT, it's visiting with city officials, city staffers, the engineering departments within cities, and putting together a lot of different puzzle pieces. And then, I've done many things outside of work. I'm going to skip forward. Okay, here's some of the things I've gotten to do outside of my job. And I should have mentioned, Ryan touched on this, but I did get a degree from BYU. I got an MBA, but before that, I went to Utah State University, which is a terrific university, and I got a degree in landscape architecture and environmental planning. So these are some of the things I've gotten to do outside of work. So it might be someday that you are not working in corporate America, or you don't have a full-time job, or you are a mom of eight kids and you're living in Wisconsin, and that's your full-time job. But there's other ways to get involved, to engage in civics, to serve your community, to have a social impact, wherever you live. So yeah, I put this up here because these are things I've gotten to do largely before I was like, I don't know, 30. And so it doesn't matter how long you've lived in a city, and it doesn't matter how old you are, you can find a way to serve and connect, and your impact, I think, is greatest wherever you are. It sounds interesting to do, I don't know, create a well in Africa or do something very remote, but the greatest impact you can have is truly where you live. Let's see. I got involved with LDS or Stewardship, which is a nonprofit. I got involved because of just some connections I made through my career. And there was a woman named Celeste, and Celeste said, hey, I'm part of this nonprofit called LDS or Stewardship, and it's about reminding saints and kind of bringing to the surface some of these principles or teachings of the gospel that are sometimes forgotten about how we should value God as a creator and his creations, how we should be good stewards, how we should care for planet Earth. And I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I've always loved planet Earth, anything to do with natural resources, anything to do with the environment, like that's my jam ever since I was a kid. So I got involved, and I met some really terrific people, and many of them were in Provo. So then I got, kind of at the same time I got involved hearing about issues in and around Provo. And anyways, I went on to serve on the board of LDS or Stewardship, and I'm not on the board anymore, but I still maintain those friends and relationships, which are really valuable to me, and I think that you'll find as you get involved, those relationships will be really valuable to you. It turns out the woman that got me involved with this, my friend Celeste, she went on to work for Congressman Chris Stewart in Washington, D.C. So she got a law degree at BYU. Then she went down to Washington County and worked for the Water Conservancy District, because she's like a water law guru. She worked a lot on natural resource issues, and then Chris Stewart, Congressman Chris Stewart, calls her and says, come to D.C., work for me. So she goes out there, she gets to work on some really incredible bills. Then Chris Stewart was like, I'm not going to run anymore, and Celeste decides she's going to run. So Celeste ran in a special election and won Chris Stewart's seat, and now she's one of 4 Congress members from Utah, the only Congresswoman representing Utah, Celeste Malloy. So she's having really interesting experiences now in D.C. I don't want to bring too much dark baggage to this conversation, but she was working for Chris Stewart on January 6th, 4 years ago, and I texted her, I'm like, are you okay? Are you safe? She's like, yeah, we're like sheltering in place. And anyways, that's just a funny memory to me. It's not a funny memory, it's a sad memory, but I'm glad she's safe. So backing up, some of the issues I've gotten to work on in my professional career. Before I worked at Rio Tinto, I mostly worked for civil engineering firms. I did a lot of city planning, infrastructure planning. I also got to write a lot of natural resource policy, working on federal public lands. And I've gotten a front row seat to growth issues in Utah and development and private property rights. I've gotten to see that from many different angles because I've worked for developers. I've worked as a consultant for cities. I was a member of the Provo City Planning Commission and the Utah County Planning Commission, and they're making development decisions and advising on growth and development. And then as a city council member, that's one of their primary roles, is to be the land use authority and to make decisions about what private property rights people have on their land, which in turn, the outcome of that would be what they can do with their land, what they can build or can't build. So that's been really rewarding for me. This is in San Juan County. It's called House on Fire. It's part of a national monument called Bears Ears National Monument. And it's been a federal political football. And I think Barack Obama dedicated it, dedicated it as a national monument. Then, like in the last month of his office. And then Trump immediately disbanded it. And then I think Biden reinstituted it. So we might see if Trump disbands it. I don't know. It's a political football. And what was interesting about working on that project in San Juan County is in the media it looked like there were just two sides, a red and a blue side, or sometimes they said that all Native Americans believed this, or that Native Americans generally were supporting X or Y or Z. But working on the ground, you could see that there were 19 different opinions, right? There was not two buckets or two boxes or two political opinions on what should be done with the national monument. There was many varied opinions on how it should be managed. So, fun times. When I was on the city council, I was on the city council for 4 years. I think you know this. Most people don't know this. Very few people know this. Basically, 99% of elected offices in Utah and maybe across the country are part-time. You're not going to pay the bills with your part-time salary as a city council member. So, in Provo, I was on the city council for 4 years, and you have many meetings, or sometimes they're after work. Sometimes you try and squeeze them in early in the morning, at 7 or 8 a.m. There's ribbon cuttings, then there's meetings where you're discussing policy. There's meetings where citizens want to tell you why they're upset. There's meetings about coordinating on a new ordinance or a new law for the city. There's extra meetings when it's budget season. But then every 2 weeks, on a Tuesday, usually the first and third Tuesday, the council starts to meet at about noon, and then they finish around 8 or 9, sometimes 10 p.m. And that's where they are doing the public's business, and those are public meetings that you can attend. But it's part-time, so most of us still have a full-time job to do, and that's what's paying the bills. Those offices are typically compensated, so as a city council member, I made $20,000 a year being a city council member, but that, like I said, that's not gonna pay for your Google Fiber. Some of the issues that I worked on, were housing. Utah has what's called a housing crisis. We have a lot of in-migration, we have a lot of kids growing up, we have a strong population, a strong economy, and for a lot of reasons, housing supply has not kept up with demand. At the same time, our salaries have not kept up with the inflation and cost of housing. And so it's really harder and harder and less attainable to buy your first house. So housing has been a big issue. It's an issue prioritized by the governor, by the legislature, and they blame the cities, almost exclusively blame the cities for not building enough housing. The cities are part of the puzzle. They're not the entire issue, but there is a trend of NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard, where citizens come to meetings and they are mad and they do not want townhomes in their neighborhood because yucky people live in townhomes and I can't have yucky people living in my neighborhood, hurting my children, leaving litter in my sidewalk. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think yucky people live in townhomes. When I was on the council, the first 2 years I was the only woman. I was the youngest person by about 10 years, and I was the only renter, and I lived in a townhome. And so when people say yucky things about townhome dwellers, I'm like, that's me, rude. And we need all types of housing in our community. So brew pubs was a big one. I laugh now, man. We got so many emails about that. City planning, we did a lot of that. The city hadn't updated their general plan, which kind of governs how we're going to develop the built environment and what we might do with housing, land use, transportation, water, recreation in our community. They hadn't updated, they'd made tweaks, but they hadn't written that plan since I think 1997. It was very old. And so I said, we got to update this. And so basically almost the day I started, we kicked that off, and it took about 4 years to get something passed. But that was important to me because it's important that we have a cohesive plan for how we want to grow, what values we want to incorporate into our growth, and then have a clear way of communicating that to developers so they have expectations and some type of clarity in what they could develop and build. Slate Canyon and environmental issues, that's a big deal to me. Like I said, I just love anything to do with the environment. And it's sad because Provo River is such a unique resource, such a special place. It has a reputation as a place to be assaulted, unfortunately. And had we done better city planning, we could have mitigated and prevented some of the dangers that have accumulated around the Provo River. And so that was one of the things I pushed when I was on the council, was like, let's plan for the trails, the canyons, and the foothills, make those safe places, connected places, right, where the trails aren't connected. And then let's also plan for the lakeshore of Utah Lake. Utah Lake is a terrific amenity and asset. It's very uncommon that we get to live, you could run or bike from the mountains to the lake in Provo. Like, it's a very narrow spot between the mountains and the lake. And there's almost no place even in Utah where you could do that. And we should take advantage of that. We should be proud of that. We should make these amenities and safe places for everyone to spend time and recreate. So those were things that I really pushed. And then Utah Lake, oh man, we for many years saw the legislature and funny developers thinking that they were going to dredge Utah Lake, push all the soils together, and then build these Dubai-style islands on Utah Lake, and then skyscrapers on top of that. And I'm like, you don't have to be a geotechnical scientist to know that's not a good idea, okay? And they kept pushing that, and they kept pushing that. And with nonprofits, and with the city council, and with our fearless leader, Ben Abbott, we were able to push back and bring some reason to the people making those decisions. And so for now, I think it's mostly dead. Could be resurrected. Yikes. So those were some of the things I got to work on. Along the way, I got to meet really cool people, create really great relationships. I got unique experiences. There's a picture, I think, later where I'm in a giant water tank. The city drained one of its water tanks, and then we got to crawl inside. It was really neat because those are massive. I got to go sailing on Utah Lake. That's pretty neat. I went to the solar farm in Mona, Utah. I was on the power board for Provo because I was on the city council. And almost 50% of the energy that Provo City uses, because we have our own power company, are sourced from like clean sources. So we're mostly almost not using sources like coal, but we can influence as city council members and participants with the power board and the broader aggregation or group that delivers that power. We can influence what power sources are brought online and what we want to use. So we have hydropower, we have solar power, we have some natural gas, and then they're trying to increase our percentage of clean power. And then there we are at Slate Canyon. That's Craig Christensen in the middle. He's now on the city council. And then Rachel Whipple, she's on the city council as well, and I served with her. And then up there, that was an event we did with LDS through Stewardship. And Sharon Eubank came and spoke and told us about her environmental ethics and how they relate to her humanitarian work, and it was very powerful. And then Chip Oscarson, he's a professor here, really great. Along the way, using my skills from my own campaign, I've gotten to help other people with their campaigns. So if you want to ask me about campaigns, you can. I have local campaign experience. I've never worked on a state level or federal level campaign. But Jessica was the first campaign I helped. She's my sister. She won. And then I helped my cousins, Audrey and Corey. They won. And then I helped my friend, McKay Jensen, and he didn't win, but we wish he had won. He's really great. And when I was an undergrad, it's not really part of my major, but I took a couple of, graphic design classes. I kind of stayed playing around in graphic design for a decade thereafter. And I used it on the side for different things, right? If you need an invitation for like a service project or, different things along the way. I created websites for a couple of things. And then I got to use my graphic design skills to help people get elected. And you would be shocked at how professional that mailer up there looks compared to other people's campaigns locally. Like, pretty low budget, but when you can add in even amateur graphic design skills. It can elevate your message. This is my sister. I did this like graphic design for her, and yeah, we just had some really fun campaign stories along the way. She is a mom of 8. She got a degree here in international relations. Then she got an MPA at BYU, and she's not worked outside the home. She's not had a job in government or corporate America, but she's brilliant, much smarter than me. And she moved to her city of Woods Cross, and she thought, oh, maybe I should get involved. It would be fun to like get out of the house and have conversations with adults. And so she talked to the mayor of the town and said, hey, if you need someone for planning commission, let me know. I'd love to participate. And at some point, a couple months later, he appointed her to the planning commission. So then twice a month, she would go to city meetings, and developers present what they want to rezone or what they want to change. And she got to evaluate that based on her education and her experiences. She's also been a great advocate for the Hispanic and Latino community, and knows what it's like to be a millennial with limited housing options, right? So she's just had a very different path in politics than I have, in part because she hasn't had like a corporate career. Then she wanted to, or someone wanted her to, run for city council, so she ran for city council in Woods Cross. She'd only lived there a couple of years. I'd only lived in Provo for a couple of years when I ran. I didn't think Provo was my forever home. I still don't think Provo is my forever home, but I just want you to know, no matter how long you live somewhere, get involved. Like, don't be trunky, right? If you got transferred someplace on your mission and you were only there for 6 weeks, didn't mean you were going to sit in your apartment, I hope. Like, wherever you are, even if you moved to Madison, Wisconsin for 2 years for grad school, just get involved. Doesn't matter what your timeline is, doesn't matter how long you think you're going to be there, or if it's where you want to end up, you can be involved at any level if you just pick up the phone and send a couple of emails and say, hey, I'd like to contribute, I'd like to volunteer. So she got elected to city council, and she does a great job. She had her 8th baby when she was on the city council, and then she had to move away. And so if you move away from your city, then you've got to resign your post, and they're going to appoint someone in your position. So they moved to the suburbs of Milwaukee. And I was talking to her recently, right, and just after they moved there, the prophet announced that there was going to be a temple in Milwaukee. And that's exciting. And she said, you know what, maybe I should get on the planning commission in this town, because what if they put the temple here and they need like a supporter and an advocate from within the city to support the temple? Because temples are not unanimously supported by all communities, right? So she thought she could be an advocate in that way. So the reason I bring this up, not just to brag about my sister, but also because whatever career path you have, whether you work part-time or whether you're a full-time parent or whether you're taking a break, like, you can still be involved, you can still be engaged, and you can absolutely make a difference. I love to share this quote from Neil Maxwell, who was a political scientist and also a member of the 12. And he was talking about how it's not just important who we vote for, but who gets on the ballot. Right? And I feel like that is absolutely critical, and it's one of the kind of behind the curtain things that I've learned being involved in Provo City. It's like how people get on the ballot, how we support them. And then certainly at the national level, right? Or even the state level, how do people get on the ballot? Those systems are sometimes intentionally codified so that it's hard for nonpartisans to be involved. But I just love this quote. He says, some modest adventures of various kinds into the world of public service have helped me to see, too, that the shaping of choices in the political process is at least as important as choosing among the choices. In electoral ecology, there is greater impact and influence at the front end of the process than in the voting booth, as sacred and special as the latter is. The voting booth is very democratic, but the shaping of the alternatives is aristocratic. It is work that is done by a few. I've been struck over and over again in my experiences with government and politics, modest as they are, by the Lord's counsel that honest, wise, and good individuals should be sought for diligently, and that such individuals we should observe to uphold. And that's one thing I try and do since my own election is I made many friends through my campaign and saw people support me whose support I didn't expect or maybe deserve. And now when my friends run, I try and stick with them and I try and support them. And apologies to a couple of people out there because I've been very unplugged the last year. But it is important that we shape the outcomes instead of complain about the two people that are on the ballot. Cool? So I wanted to present two case studies to you today. Very interested in your feedback. One is a housing case study, because I work on housing at work and as a council member, and I worry about it as a millennial. I'm a millennial that's not going to inherit any money from my parents, right? There's no secret funds coming in at any point in my life, but I hope that happens to you. So this is how we could evaluate housing costs here in Utah. So I relied on ChatGPT a bit to get here. But if your gross annual income was $150,000 a year, which is what annual means, then you might take home $87,000, right? You got to pay into your 401k, you got to pay state taxes, you've got to pay federal taxes. They might take some type of like benefits out of your paycheck. So you're not taking home, obviously, $150,000. At the end of the year, you might have $87,000. And this does not include tithing, so yeah, plug that in if you need to. Net monthly income, divide that by 12, and you're at $7,252. There's kind of this rough ratio that they make on housing costs, which is your housing costs all in, not just your mortgage, but technically your utilities as well, should be about 1/3 of your income, your monthly income. So if you divide that by 3, then 1/3 of your monthly income is $2,417, right? So then I asked ChatGPT, like, what mortgage could you get if that's your payment every month? And the highest mortgage you could get with these assumptions is for about $400,000. Most houses in Utah are above $400,000. It's going to be hard to find a house for $400,000. Now, if you're only making $80,000, you talk about Provo police officer doesn't make $80,000. Provo city school teacher doesn't make $80,000. They make less. It's a tough spot. I wish they made $80,000, right? But we're just backing it down. Do the same kind of math, same kinds of equations, and your max potential mortgage is $250,000. So when I go to Zillow and I put in like a max cost, $250,000, many of the homes that come up are like portable trailer homes. There's not a lot of condos, but let's look at this. This is Zillow today. So if you had the first income and you could afford a $400,000 mortgage, this is what you could afford in Utah County. 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, 1,700 square feet. So that's great. I love that for you. You are making quite a bit of money, but like I said, your income is not keeping up with the cost of housing. And in Utah, we're kind of landlocked, where we can't keep building out because of the mountains and the lakes. So we've got to keep building in and or up or out and sprawl to the north and the south. So this is what you're looking at. I also took this from Zillow today. If you had the second income of $80,000 a year, then your mortgage would be, what did we say? Mortgage would be $250,000 total. Here's what I put in to Zillow. So, like I said, a teacher in Provo is not making that much money. A police officer in Provo is not making that much money. They have college degrees. They might have 2 college degrees. And this might be unattainable for them. That's why housing becomes such a significant issue, and it reduces our ability to invest long term because your house appreciates over time. It also can impact the stability of children, right? If you had to move all the time, you were renting, or you had a situation that created instability for your children, that might not improve their outcomes in education. And everyone deserves a safe place to live. So the governor's working on this, the legislature's working on this, some of the cities are working on this. But it's, you just read the newspaper almost any day of the week in Utah, somebody's talking about housing. And so one of the issues that I really tried to work on in Provo was accessory dwelling units. Does anyone know what an accessory dwelling unit is? We got a nod. Yeah. Okay. An accessory dwelling unit is a solution, one of the solutions that the state legislature wants all the cities to adopt. And the idea is that, like, if you had a basement with an entry in the basement, maybe you could create a kitchen down there and rent that out, and then you would have part of your home that you didn't need, creating income for you, but also doubling the housing on that lot, right? So maybe a college student wants to live there. Maybe a young couple wants to live there. Maybe your aunt just got divorced and she wants to live there. It's a really good solution. I like it because it's my generation that's kind of on the leading edge of experiencing housing in affordability, and you're right behind us, so you should like it too. But the opportunities are really terrific, and they can disguise density. So if people didn't like looking at apartment buildings because of the aesthetic, this disguises it. You don't really realize that someone's living in the basement. So here there's one that's like, maybe you convert your garage to be an ADU, or you put a unit above your garage. The city came up with a policy I don't really love for accessory dwelling units, right? The state came in and said, cities, you're going to be part of the solution, and you need to do it this way. And Provo City, what they decided to do is, because many accessory dwelling units are easily placed in the basement, they said, well, we'll allow accessory dwelling units west of I-15, close to Utah Lake. The problem is you can't build basements west of I-15 close to Utah Lake because the water table is so high. And they did that intentionally. I should say the majority of people who voted on that thought it would create too many problems. Neighbors didn't want parked cars in front of their house. Neighbors didn't want people coming and going, which is a shame. But that's one of the policies they adopted. The other goofy policy they adopted, you're gonna have to delete this recording later. The other policy they adopted was like, and it's insane, but they said, okay, if you just want your own ADU and you're not part of one of these bigger areas, because like the Tree Streets, they're allowed to have ADUs, and the West Side, they're allowed to have ADUs. But if you live somewhere else on the map, here's what you got to do: go to all of your neighbors, and you need to get like 60% of them to sign an affirmative document saying they're okay with you using your property for an ADU. Which is insane. Like, I don't know if Jim or Sally's going to answer the door. I love Sally. Jim doesn't even know me. Do you know what I mean? Or like, what if there's college girls renting that house? My neighbors on the left are college girls renting that house. Are they just going to sign some rando document? They don't even own the house. It doesn't make any sense. Anyways, one of the people who was invested in that was John and Sue Curtis. John and Sue Curtis are terrific members of our Provo community. John was the mayor. He appointed me to the planning commission. I never worked with him because he went on to be our congressman. Now he's our senator-elect. They have a beautiful custom home in North Provo. And above their garage, they built an ADU. And maybe they're going back and forth to D.C., and they just want someone to kind of look out for the house. Or maybe it was a good place for their like young married daughter to live. I don't know, right? It is a terrific solution, but that's what they wanted. They wanted a path to have a legal ADU. And so we got a couple emails from Sue Curtis, and she came to a couple of meetings, and they cared about this issue. And when it was passed, I imagine, she went to her neighbors and said, hey, can you sign this? We'd like to have an ADU. And apparently, I don't know, her neighbors signed it. So that's cool. They have an ADU. They also have a very expensive house. Now, I'm not on the council. The gentleman, who is a friend of mine, who doesn't like ADUs, who also has an expensive house and has a basement apartment, is changing the law so that you couldn't do that. It's only if you live in like 2 spots. None of this like single issue, get your neighbors to sign. They're going to delete that. Which, even though it was a bad process, it was a process. So it's a little funny that like some of the wealthiest members of our community have ADUs, use them to their benefit, but at least in one case, don't want other people to have a similar benefit. Sad. Anyways, now here's another case study. Demand for copper. I work at a copper mine. We produce copper. Copper's in anything that's electrical. It's in your stoplights, it's in your cell phone, it's in your computer, it's in your car. It's ubiquitous. It's the most like conductive metal for electricity, and it's in high demand. So McKinsey, the consulting firm, they said that by 2031, the world will need about 36.6 million metric tons of copper, which is up from 25 million metric tons in 2023. So we're seeing this huge demand in copper over time. And some of what's driving that is our renewable energy systems. If we want to electrify the grid, if we want to bring on renewable energy, then we truly need more copper within those systems, right? So wind turbines and transmission lines to connect the wind turbines to a transmission station, and then the transmission station to the city. Like, all of that requires a ton of copper. Another huge driver of the demand for copper is electric vehicles. Electric vehicles require 4 times as much copper as a regular gas vehicle. And electric vehicles are, on net, better for the environment because they don't have the same emissions. Sorry, my voice is a little funny. I'm getting over a sinus infection. But I don't actually sound like RFK Jr. in real life. So electric vehicles are important. They're important in the U.S. Like, they've created policy to support and expand adoption. But certainly in the EU, right? They're going even harder. So there's this huge demand there. Energy storage, battery systems, grid storage and stability, urbanization and infrastructure in developing countries. They all need more copper for basic infrastructure that we already have. And but there's these huge supply constraints that are interfering, which is the development of new copper mines. So this is where we get into poli-sci. I love it. I mean, this is like national and international stuff. Before, housing is pretty local. But this is a picture of a protest in Serbia. And Rio Tinto, where I work, they bought a lithium mine in Serbia. And it's undeveloped, but lithium is essential in all rechargeable batteries, so our computers and our phones. And certainly, like, most of an electric vehicle is a lithium battery. That's why they're so heavy, is because you just have massive batteries within the body of this vehicle. And then any kind of like battery storage system requires lithium. So there's this huge growing demand for lithium. They found this high-grade deposit of lithium in Serbia. And they're like, hey, we could develop this, and it's already, connected to Europe, and we can support these EU goals, and we can support these UN goals. This is like 1 bazillion citizens protesting the lithium mine. They hate it. It's real bad. And the company has tried really hard, and they've done a lot of studies, and they've tried to be very transparent. And it's like people's jobs. People are employed to be like stakeholder managers, to interface with NGOs, interface with civil society, interface with local governments, interface with federal governments. Like, those are all jobs on the ground in Serbia right now for Rio Tinto, and in most countries that we work in. There's other people that are out to manage environmental impacts, to show reports of what are and aren't the environmental impacts, and the water that can be used and reused. At many mines, we can reuse 80% of the water. Anyways, it's still not popular. And the government gave us the rights to mine, and then they took it back because the protests were so intense. The political pressure was so intense. So then that's litigated in the courts because you can't take back the permit that you gave. But the mine still hasn't been developed, and there's still many opportunities for those interested in working in Serbia on natural resource issues to solve some of these problems. But this is another case of NIMBYism. There's NIMBYism in housing, and there's NIMBYism in mining, and it spans the globe because people don't want to mine in their backyard, even though it goes towards something we think is virtuous and would eventually reduce emissions and would eventually reduce our carbon footprint, like electric vehicles. Okay, anybody from Arizona? Okay, 1.5 of us. I've lived in Arizona a good part of my life. So the center star in the Arizona state flag is copper. It represents the copper that the state produces. It's copper colored, and Arizona produces more copper than any other state. The biggest copper mine in the country is in Arizona. And there's what's called the Copper Triangle. And Rio Tinto and another mining company bought a old mine in the Copper Triangle. And they'd like to redevelop it, and they think if they can start this new part of the mine, that they would be able to produce 25% of the copper that the U.S. needs. Other like piece to all these geopolitics is we'd like to have our critical minerals, the minerals we need to function in society and to advance our economy. We'd like to have them either onshored or friend-shored, right? So hopefully we can get them from our friends in Canada and Australia if we can't get them here. But we also have to process them here because most of the minerals that come out of Australia are processed in China. And if at some point we're really unfriendly to the Chinese, we might have the worst possible supply chain issues, which would dramatically impact our economic outputs as a country. And even your ability to like turn on the lights could be impacted. Your ability to go to war could be impacted by that supply chain. Anyways, so they'd like, some people who care about critical minerals and miners would like to see this new copper mine get off the ground and get going. The problem is, one of the problems is, that the land that it's on was swapped with the federal government. So the federal government got a bunch of land, Rio Tinto got a little bit of land in this land swap. But that's the land that they want to mine. It's an underground mine, but eventually the land above it would settle because of the underground mine, the mechanism that they're using. There's a number of Native American tribes in the area, and one Native American tribe is opposed. And it has been litigated for 20 years. And it could be litigated for another 10 years. And for them, Oak Flat, it's a beautiful area. I've been out there. It's a really beautiful area. To them, that's a sacred place where they practice religious rituals. And so they're saying that it's a freedom of religion issue. And that's what they're litigating in court, is their ability to access religious rights on that land. Really interesting stuff because, again, the local communities outside of this Native American tribe are really interested and invested because their communities have declined over the years. They have high rates of drug use and low rates of education, and they think if we can bring better jobs and more people and more education, more diversification to our economy, we would be better off. So they're managing just a lot of complexity. But again, jobs in poli-sci are not short in Arizona. They have people working on environmental impacts, people working with local communities, people working on what's called communities and social performance, people doing government affairs at the state level. This is our number one issue with the U.S. federal government. So Bold Batar, who's like our chief commercial officer, as soon as the election was declared, he's like, I sure hope Donald Trump will help us with this mine, because that's the number one issue in Washington for our company. So those are two case studies. One is kind of federal and national, and then the other, housing, is pretty local. Back to Serbia, they found out that the Russians were interfering in like misinformation campaigns around the mine's impact in Serbian social media. It's just so interesting. Like you almost can't make this stuff up. So I want to give you time to ask questions. This is an important quote that I try and share with every single student I meet, and it's not specifically about environmental issues. It's really broad if you can interpret it that way. But it's from Tolkien, and it's also been quoted by Neil Maxwell, and Jeffrey R. Holland. And he says something really important about like not wearing yourself out and not worrying about societal issues you can't totally change by yourself. He says, it's not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are set, uprooting the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule. So I want you to make an impact in your community. I want you to make a difference. I want you to find your place in policy or politics or social impact or civic engagement. And if you get worn down, remember, you don't have control over the weather. Just leave the fields where you are cleaner than you found them. Last slide. This is some of the things I've read over the last year. Really good books that I would recommend. And then these are some of the podcasts I listen to compulsively when I get up in the morning or when I'm raking leaves. So if that's interesting to you, that's how I stay up to date. But tell me, what questions do you have? Yeah.
Do you have recommendations for getting involved in Provo?
Yeah, absolutely. Recommendations for getting involved in Provo. It just depends on what issues you care about and what you feel connected to. There's a really active nonprofit called Bike Walk Provo, and they care a lot about pedestrian safety and bike safety and safe roads. And and I care about those things too, but I'm not involved with them. You could get involved with them. You could find Erin, who's been involved forever, and say, hey, what kind of resources could I bring, or how could I shape a conversation? Another one is like, there's the Bike Collective in Provo, and that's a nonprofit, and they, what's that?
We just announced that they're closing today,
You're kidding me.
but we're going to try to take it over.
Really? Oh, a coup. Oh, I didn't get to talk about a coup earlier, darn it. Okay. But the Bike Collective, assuming it moves forward, is really cool because people donate bikes, or like BYU, if they find that bikes were just left on campus over time and that no one claims them, they'll donate those bikes and people volunteer to fix up the bikes, and then the bikes can be purchased, or kids' bikes can be donated to kiddos that don't have the resources to buy the bikes themselves. So it's a really cool community organization, and assuming they move forward, you could pop in and say, hey, how can I volunteer? One thing that I've done is like connect with like a city council member or the mayor and say, hey, I care about housing. Who's working on housing in our community? And they might send you to a staffer, or they might send you to a council member, or they might shut you down because they don't agree with you. But try and find someone who's working on the issues that you're working on and just plug in with them. And there's a lot of resources, or a lot of like community connections, like the Civic Engagement Advisory Board, Civic Engagement Minor Advisory Board, is people like me, people I've worked with, who, like Karen McCandless, who's the executive director of Community Action Services and Food Bank. So she's helping homeless people every single day, full time. So if that's an issue to you, like, come talk to me or Erin and say, hey, how can I find Karen McCandless? Because then you can do an informational interview with her and find out where you could plug in. And I'll just give a big endorsement for informational interviews. I think you should be doing them religiously. You'll learn so much. You'll learn all about people's careers. They're eager to talk to you. They want to share info. And you'll find out, like, oh, maybe city government is not for me, but I'd really like state level issues, right? You can find that out early on by doing informational interviews. Did I answer your question? Enough. Okay. Yeah.
I served my mission among Native Americans, and I'm curious, working in a city like Provo versus working with the natives, what are some of the main differences?
You know, to be candid, I've not had a front row seat or personal relationships with many Native Americans, so I should not give my opinion. But what I'm learning is that every nation or tribe is unique, and they require a lot of cultural context. So there are people who work within Rio Tinto who manage Indigenous relationships. In Australia, they call them Indigenous peoples and Torres Strait Islanders. In Canada, I think they call them First Nations. Here in the U.S., we call them Native Americans. So even that, the label or the name that we give them is unique, and I just would not be a good advisor because I think that there's so much nuance, and I've not had that proximity. Is that fair? Where did you, sir? Oh, cool. That's beautiful. That's right by Bears Ears. Yeah, Blanding, Monticello, Bluff. Way to go. Yeah.
It's kind of a random question, but what are your thoughts on like ADUs and Airbnbs and like people using it as short-term rentals? Like, do you think that's taking up housing? Do you think it's still helpful?
Yeah. So an Airbnb, a short-term rental, is also regulated by cities. If you wanted, you could get a job working for Airbnb doing government relations and working with the cities on their policies around that. In Provo, we had this conversation, and Provo is not a major touristic destination. In Moab, in St. George, they can be overwhelmed by Airbnbs or short-term rentals. People are going to make more money renting them as Airbnbs than they would as a long-term rental. So there's a huge incentive, and that's driving away affordable housing, or almost any type of housing for people who need to live in that community and work in that community. So really difficult in places like Moab and St. George. Provo is not touristic. We're not the front door of a national park. And my experience with Airbnbs in Provo has been net positive because I've seen people take cruddy old houses that could have been condemned, totally gut them, turn them into Airbnbs next to like a BYU football stadium, and improve the quality of housing in our community. And then they're shut down, and that's kind of a bummer, but that's the law. When I was on the council, I had a police officer call me, a Provo police officer, and he said, look, I was running an Airbnb out of my basement, and I'm a cop. Nobody's smoking pot in my basement. My cop car is parked outside. And we've had great connections, and we've had a second source of income because of this Airbnb, and the city shut it down. And I'm like, that's a real bummer. And I do wish our police officers had a second source of income, because I know we don't pay them well. And certainly it would be a safe place to put an Airbnb, because nobody's going to do weird stuff in the cop's basement. That's the law. So I think on net they're positive, but it's just a totally different animal in like a true touristic destination. When I went to, I can't remember if it was Barcelona or Madrid or someplace in Spain, I got an Airbnb, and on the door of the apartment complex, before I was like let in and went upstairs, there's like this sign in Spanish that says, no Airbnbs allowed. And they're really trying to crack down, and they haven't cracked down on the guy that I rented from. Yeah, any other questions? Campaigns, mining, city issues, women in government? Okay, we figured it out. Oh, one here, yeah. No, you're good.
The more I listen to these lectures, the more I'm seeing like the possibilities are like so extensive, and like I don't know, I'm kind of mind blown because I didn't really realize all the possibilities of careers. How kind of did you get to where you are, and how did you know that that's like your calling?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been interested in environmental issues, and it just called to me from a young age, and that informed my education. I got into city planning because it was one of the more lucrative things I could do with my undergraduate degree, in a time when the economy was in the toilet. And it was really interesting for me to solve problems for developers and hopefully solve problems for the environment. And at that time, I heard from someone, like a high-level professional in my field, who said, good cities are the salvation of the environment, right? Because we need fewer resources, and we can emit less carbon, and we can have less of a footprint or impact on the broader environment if we build good cities. And that really motivated me. And I like seeing like tangible things. I couldn't work in tech. I have friends who work at Adobe, and they have terrific benefits. It's so cool. But it's not a tangible product for me, you know? And I like something you can touch, something that's related to the earth. So it's not, yeah, it's a lot of it's been, it depends on kind of your values, right? So my values have been, I want to do something related to planet Earth, and I also am motivated by money. Like I don't have like some inheritance from my gran, right? And I'm not married or partnered. Like I don't have a plan B if I lose my job tomorrow. So financial security is incredibly important to me, and that's what's motivated me along the way. I think about now, like, oh, my career, I could stay in mining, I could work on environmental issues, I could work on political issues, or I could leave mining and I could go do like large-scale developments with other developers. And I don't know what is in my future, but I do think that understanding your values and holding on to those, and even if everyone else wants to do something more and I don't want to say more interesting, but more interesting to them or more trendy at the moment, like hold on to what's always been interesting to you, and understand where you want to be in so many years, or what you want to create for your family, or the stability you're looking for financially. Just latch onto those values, and then again, like do informational interviews. And I've had jobs in government. I worked in the public sector, and I saw a lot of bureaucracy, and I was like, this is not the pace for me. I don't want all these internal politics, and if you have to make decisions based on a campaign cycle, that's a bummer. And now I've worked for small companies, small private companies, Pretty low on politics where I was, so that's a positive. Pretty low on bureaucracy, so that's a positive. Now I work for a company that's at a totally different scale, doing like incredible stuff, like working with a coup leader in Guinea, doing the work of the UN on the continent of Africa, and but there's a lot of bureaucracy, and there's office politics. But you're not going to know that as an undergrad necessarily. But when you get 2 or 3 jobs, you'll find out what you like and what you don't like. One thing that worked for me, may not work for everybody, is I worked for 4 years before I got a master's degree. And I could bring more experience to my cohort as a graduate student, and I knew what I liked and what I didn't like. So hopefully that answers your question. Anyone else? Good to go? Okay, thank you.